Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the November 2017 Manatee Tiger Bay Club meeting. The title is Me Too, Sexual Harassment, When Does Insensitive Become Illegal? Before we get started today, if you could all rise and join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. So as I said, our program today borrows a title from a current social media statement of the hashtag, or as some of us know it, the pound sign, and the words Me Too. So what can business owners do to create a safe workplace for their employees and avoid liability for the company? We can all agree that no one deserves to be sexually harassed. Recent stories in the media are shining a light on a long-standing but seldom discussed problem in Hollywood of powerful predators using threats, coercion, and force to get what they want. There should be no tolerance for such abusers. But many sexual harassment cases may not be so clear. Comments, jokes, and asides can be interpreted by different people in very different ways and open up companies to liability for the actions of their employees. When is it a compliment and when is it just creepy? What should be done about false accusations that destroy reputations and kill careers? We have a distinguished panel today. Our first speaker is going to be Evangeline Hawthorne, the director of the U.S. EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission in the Tampa field office. Ann Chapman, an attorney with Blaylock Walters who practices in labor and employment law. Dr. Judith Sedgman, a principal at Sedgman Consulting, LLC. And Lee Epting, consultant with technology and women in leadership. If you all indulge me for just a brief minute before we get started with our speakers, this is our last meeting of 2017, so it's my last meeting that I will be presiding at. So I just wanted to take a minute, rather than kind of rushing at the end, and say some thank yous. Would the members of the board, Tiger Bay board who are here, would you please stand to be recognized, including the programming committee? Many of you in the room, either now or in the past, have been a part of a nonprofit or a civic organization, and you know the time and the effort that goes into it to make it a good program and a good club. And the board this year, including the programming committee, has been absolutely fantastic to work with. We are, dare I say, a very diverse group from different areas and different beliefs, which leads for some very interesting debates when we're talking about programming. So if anybody's interested in that kind of debate, please talk to us about getting on the board. But it's always civil, it's always interesting, and always a lot of fun. But there is one person that I want to say a special thank you to, and that is our club administrator, Elaine. Many of you get, yes. Many of you get the emails about the monthly programs. She creates all of those. She keeps up the email list. She organizes. She is a webmaster. She's a lion tamer. She can literally do everything. And those of you, again, who have been part of these types of organizations know the work and the effort that goes into it. I assure you that for Tiger Bay, Elaine works 100 times harder than any of us. So there's no words I could say to express my gratitude for Elaine, her organization, her dedication to this group, and she really makes it so easy for us to focus on the programs by her taking care of all the operations. So as a very small token of my appreciation, I would like to give Elaine a gift. And this is so rude to open it for her, but I have to tell you, I found this cup, and I thought it was the most appropriate cup for the situation. It says, "You people must be exhausted from watching me do everything." Again, words can't express, Elaine, how grateful I am for this past year of working with you. All right, on to the program. Our first speaker today is Evangeline Hawthorne. Ms. Hawthorne is director of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission Tampa Field Office. She was appointed to her current position in October of 2016 and served as the National Outreach Coordinator at the EEOC's headquarters in Washington, D.C. At the EEOC, Ms. Hawthorne served as a program analyst in EEOC headquarters, a senior investigator in the EEOC Philadelphia District Office, an enforcement supervisor in the EEOC Baltimore Field Office, and the acting deputy director for the EEOC Washington Field Office. Ms. Hawthorne has been responsible for implementing, initiating, and carrying out initiatives related to the EEOC's efforts to stop and remedy employment discrimination through its enforcement, outreach, education, and training programs. Ms. Hawthorne received her master's degree in public administration from Wilmington University and bachelor's degree in political science from Rutgers University. Ms. Hawthorne has served on several boards and community organizations which reflect both her passion and steadfast commitment for civil rights. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Evangeline Hawthorne.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's my hope that we can illuminate some of the issues related to sexual harassment, and certainly with what recourse is available through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I only have a few minutes, so I just want to give you a background first about what it is this agency is. We are the key civil rights enforcement agency that is responsible. Do I need this? Okay, that is responsible for enforcing the laws, the federal laws that prohibit employment discrimination. Now, sexual or sex discrimination is really only a fraction or a piece of what the commission is charged with. We enforce several laws which protect employees, applicants, temp workers, anything associated with employment from discrimination based on race, age, national origin, disability, religion, genetic information, retaliation. There are various laws that we infect. But I just want to specifically focus today on the topic at hand, which is sexual harassment. I just want to give you the broad kind of spectrum of what it is that we do. Okay, so with that being said, Title VII is the law, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that basically establishes the basis of sex discrimination, which includes gender, pregnancy, and sexual harassment. That is the key piece of legislation that we're going to talk about in terms of how we look at sexual harassment. I want to define it for you first, because I know there's so much information in the news as of late with between Harvey Weinstein, between Roy Moore, between all that. What exactly is sexual harassment? Because you can hear, or you basically get a sense from the media that it can be all sorts of different things, which kind of maybe blur the lines with criminal activity versus sexual harassment in the workplace. I'm sorry, I'm used to kind of moving around. Okay. All right, so let me just read the definition as it is per the regs so that you get a sense of what it is. Sexual harassment defined under Title VII: unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature that explicitly or implicitly affects an individual's employment, unreasonably interferes with an individual's work performance, or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. And that's loaded, and that could really manifests itself in many different ways. We get all types of cases of sexual harassment. It could be verbal, physical, it could be even pictures on a wall. It can come in all different formats. I know we were talking about statistics. The commission generally sees about 7,000 sexual harassment charges a year. We get about 7,000 a year out of maybe 80 or 90,000 completely across the board, all different charges. 80% of those charges are female complainants, and about 17% are male. Okay. The key piece, or the key component of sexual harassment in the workplace to really focus on is the unwelcomeness. As a commission, that is the one thing that we focus on. We have a team of investigators and a legal staff. That is the first and foremost part of sexual harassment that we have to establish. If it's a consensual act, or if there's some relationship that's going on, of course that would defeat any allegations with regard to sex harassment. But if it is known that it's unwelcome, and by that I mean there's maybe a complaint that's been filed, or if the person has expressed they're not interested, or there has to be some sort of action known that the person is not in agreement with whatever's being done or said. Give you an example. As a former investigator, I can think of a few cases in which some people don't necessarily believe these things are sexual harassment, but there may be some office banter going on where people are having discussions about, their weekend activities, perhaps that may involve, their sex life or things of that nature. And it may not necessarily be directed upon one individual, but you have a lot of people in the office who are hearing this. If someone in the office is having to be subjected to this type of conversation, they can come to us and file a complaint of sexual harassment. The employer is obligated to basically maintain a safe environment, and that type of banter could certainly lend itself to people feeling free to express and do things that they should not. Other cases I've seen where we've had warehouse people's in a warehouse employment, and they've posted pictures of women who may be scantily dressed or maybe not so much dressed. And they've posted these up in a warehouse type situation. And you have people walking back and forth through that environment who find those pictures offensive. Something like that could be considered sexual harassment. So I say that to say it's not necessarily what you might imagine in terms of someone just making a rude or sort of this comment to you, or somebody groping you or touching you. It can really it can really spread the gamut. What we really look for is that the conduct is something that is frequent and pervasive. So if this person or people have these types of materials routinely, in the office space, and someone has basically complained about that, that certainly would warrant a complaint. Now, proving it is something that, that's a whole nother level, but you can come to us and file complaints like that. Now, I wanted to just kind of, because I know I'm limited here, when someone does have a complaint, what they can do is we have a website, eoc.gov. We just launched our actually online system where someone can actually start an inquiry online. You can get a lot of information online to even see if what your issue is even established as a basis, or what we call prima facie case. You go online, you actually submit your information. The system will prompt you with certain questions to determine whether or not there is a basis to file a complaint. With that being said, you would then be given an appointment. You would come to our office and you would sit down and talk to one of our investigators. They would then draft what we call a charge of discrimination, basically the complaint, the legal form. And from there, what would happen would be that we would maybe attempt to mediate it, try to settle the case early on. And if that didn't work out, then of course we would move it into enforcement for investigation. And that process can take anywhere from maybe 6 months to a year, depending on the strength of the allegations. Once we do determine, let's say we determine that there's been a violation, we will attempt to try to conciliate that matter. And by that I mean we will try to sit down with the parties and come to some sort of resolution before they actually go to court. We are the initial or the administrative step that has to be taken before someone proceeds to file in court. So if that is successful, that's fine. A lot of times we have very good conciliation agreements where the policies are changed. There may be some training that is offered and provided. Perhaps if someone's lost their job, we can have them reinstated. If there's a promotion that, there are all kinds of things that a conciliation agreement can entail. Now, if that fails, or for instance, if we can't find a violation, we don't say that these things didn't occur. We don't say that, we just basically say it could not be proven. And if the allegations cannot be proven, the person would receive a notice of right to sue, and then they would be allowed to file their matter in court. So it doesn't necessarily end with us. However, it starts with us. And we try to take the individuals through the process of really what needs to be I knew it. I knew it. It's a hard to cram all this in 8 minutes. But that we take the person through the actual steps and stages of what it takes to prove sexual harassment complaint. Now, these things are not easy to prove because quite often, they're not done around a lot of people. I gave you some examples of posters and things of that nature, but the more egregious sexual harassment cases, there are no witnesses. So what it comes down to is being able to prove, it's her word against his word against her word. And by the way, same-sex harassment also is a part of this as well. We would take those complaints if it's 2 males or if it's 2 females. So I don't want to just, make it seem like it's just one way all the time. But if you don't have witnesses, that makes it very, very difficult. Of course, that doesn't make it impossible because the onus really is on the employer to establish that if they knew about this, they took some corrective action. If they have not taken corrective action and this thing is pervasive and going on, that's what lend itself to for us to be able to prove it further. So there are a lot of different pieces, without me getting too technical, in terms of how we go about proving something like this. But your standard cases can run, we see the gamut from, migrant workers all the way up to white collar jobs. There is no one particular area, as you see in the news now, where sexual harassment is more pervasive. I think for a while, we were really focusing our attention on fast food restaurants. There were a lot of young people in these positions who were, we had kind of a campaign in terms of educating them because they were being taken advantage of. But it's so much more widespread than that, it just crosses the gamut of all industries. Where am I? Am I good? Okay. Okay. I'll keep going. Okay, so I wanted to give you a few more. No? Okay. All right, I'll stop. Okay. All right. I'll come back if you have questions. Okay? All right. Thank you. Okay.
And I have multiple times this year apologized to speakers because this especially this sort of topic could literally be a full day seminar with breakout sessions and everything else. So I do apologize to Ms. Hawthorne and to the group. Certainly, if you have questions, at the end of the speakers, you can ask away. And visit their website. I was on it in preparing for this for today's program, and there is a wealth of information there that's available. Our next speaker is Ann Chapman. She's a principal at Blaylock Walters, a multi-practice, full-service business law firm with offices in Bradenton and Sarasota. She works in the firm's labor and employment and business litigation practice areas, focusing on representing clients related to labor and employment law issues, including representing public and private sector employers in discrimination, harassment, retaliation, and wage hour litigation in state and federal court and before administrative agencies. Ann also provides companies with advice and counsel concerning day-to-day employee relations issues, employment agreements, non-compete agreements, and legal compliance. A graduate of the University of Florida, Ann received her JD, her law degree, from the University of Miami College of Law, magna cum laude, in 2004. She's a member of the Florida Bar and admitted to practice in the Northern, Middle, and Southern District Court in the United States of Florida. Please join me in welcoming Ann Chapman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. as Matt mentioned, I'm an attorney, and I've had my focus primarily be employment law for the past 11 years. That's broader than harassment and discrimination issues, but certainly I can say a lot of the issues that employers have relate to harassment and discrimination, particularly sexual harassment. Generally, I will say that the goal is not to have to deal with the EEOC. Ms. Hawthorne gave a wonderful overview, but your goal is to not have to deal with them, not go through that process. And so keeping that in mind, just remember the baseline should not necessarily be, is this sexual harassment under Title VII? We want to aim a little bit higher than that as far as what our workplace and what our work sites should be. For morale purposes as well as productivity, all those kinds of things. Ms. Hawthorne did go over, sexual harassment generally and give a great overview. Some just things that popped into my mind. One thing about the media and out there nowadays, the term sexual harassment is thrown around all the time to cover all different activities, and certainly the conduct, as she mentioned, is not sexual harassment. Harvey Weinstein, that kind of conduct is criminal. Law enforcement should be involved. So don't think that it has to be by any means that egregious to be actionable sexual harassment. But one thing you do pick up from reading these accounts of people that making allegations is silence of somebody does not mean that it's wanted or they don't feel uncomfortable. There's plenty of reasons why people remain silent in the face of a joke, an inappropriate comment. So that's one thing that employers, you can't sit back and wait for people to come to you. You need to be proactive in avoiding these issues. And some of the things that an employer can do is, should do, is have an anti-harassment policy in place with a complaint procedure. Have your employees know about it. Don't say, I think we have a policy somewhere in the handbook, and let me dig it out. Just review it. Review it with your supervisors. Let supervisors know what you expect of them, what you want in your work environment. All of these are supposed to be, we want positive preventative measures. It's going to come up that you're going to find inappropriate conduct in your workplace, and when you do, exactly as Ms. Hawthorne indicated, you investigate and you remedy it. It's not the end of the world. You work within your work environment to improve it. So have the policy, have the procedures, have more than one person in the procedure to complain to. You want people to use this. You want to know what's going on in your environment. And some people might complain to you about things that you objectively don't think are that big a deal, but have a conversation with them, a communication, and you would be surprised at how far that can go in improving the morale of this employee, letting them know that you're listening to them. I will say that you need to, monitor your work environments, educate your supervisors. A lot of times employers run into problems because supervisors, which is a good thing, you promote internally. Well, then you had to have a supervisor that was perhaps very friendly with the people that they are now supervising. And you just want to make sure that when you have additional responsibility when you're a supervisor. You might not want to, engage socially as much as you did before, not necessarily, but you need to let supervisors know being a supervisor does come with it a certain level of responsibility to monitor the workplace environment. I will tell you that I had a case involving sexual harassment in South Florida, and our client, the woman, it was a woman suing for sexual harassment. She said that she did complain to the employer prior to the lawsuit or the charge of discrimination. The employer, our client, said, I've never heard of any, she never swore up and down. She never complained to anybody. So at her deposition, we asked her, when did you complain about this sexual harassment? And she says, I talked to the vice president of whatever, and I told him during a phone call that, my male supervisor was doing this. It was one of those companies that has a vice president of everything and anything. And so the employer went to the vice president and he said, oh yeah, she did mention, along with other complaints about this supervisor, that comment. I didn't think it was my place to do anything with that comment. I didn't think that she wanted me to do anything with it, and I respected her wishes. I thought it was more a friend confiding in another friend, And the problem is the employer's policy said you could complain to any vice president of the company about harassment. So it's not enough to have these policies in place. You need to educate the people that are being complained to as to what their responsibilities are. And that goes a long way. The other thing I will say is, sexual harassment, it does have to be unwanted. Severe or frequent is what's actionable. I've seen it in terms of emails or jokes or comments. Nowadays with social media, it's a little bit difficult because people do have communications on and outside of work and at work. But one of an interesting case I had that I thought that was kind of enlightening to you all is several years ago, I represented a bar and grill on the east coast of Florida. The bar and grill faced a charge of discrimination by the EEOC. They found cause, and they ultimately, the EEOC, they could not conciliate. The EEOC filed a lawsuit against them over in Palm Beach. Now, what's interesting about the case is we represent the employer. The employer comes to us and says, I understand that this female server, it was a restaurant where almost all, if not all, the servers were female. This female server was complaining about a customer that was harassing her. Well, the customer happened to be the husband of another server that also happened to be a sheriff's deputy and sometimes would show up in uniform. And so our client says, look, we told the guy, and he was older. The server that was complaining was probably in her 20s. He was in his 40s or 50s, had a military background. So I think there was a level, obviously, of intimidation on this server's part, but she didn't say anything to him. The employer said to us, we asked him not to come, not to talk with the server so much, not to come up, and they said he would come back after that to pick up his wife, but they said he's a sheriff's deputy. We're not going to tell him you can't come here. Well, the EEOC took the case. It ended up being, we litigated it. We had some depositions. It was ultimately resolved. It didn't go to trial. We entered into a consent decree. But during the case, there were several depositions taken of servers, other female servers. Now, some said, they all testified as to the conduct of this individual, as to the sheriff's deputy, but they also said some were offended by it and some weren't. Some said, so you can't say, it's very hard to tell what is and what is not sexual harassment. The other thing that was interesting is when the EEOC filed the case, they issued a press release and a posting on their website. So the law enforcement agency that this officer worked for did their own internal affairs investigation as to the issue, because they found out, I don't think the EEOC gave them a heads up. They found out in the paper that they're, and the internal affairs investigation by the agency found no problem with this officer's conduct. Now, they're looking into other issues, but I think that shows the struggle with everyone to know what is and what is not and how it depends on the person and the situation. And so the best thing to do is to have these policies and procedures in place so you can see what's going on, and if it's a question at all, so you can take measures to prevent it and err on the side of caution. So I know that my time is up. I look forward to answering your questions later.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Judith Sedgman. Dr. Sedgman is the principal in Sedgman Consulting, LLC, specializing in innate.
Yes.
I wasn't sure if it was innate or inmate.
No, it's innate.
Innate. Innate.
When I work in the jails.
I wasn't sure if it was innate or inmate. Innate health, the natural resiliency and wisdom accessible to all people. She is a program consultant to the Center for Sustainable Change, a global organization that supports, trains, and develops community-based resiliency work, offering weekly webinars and trainings for the center. She offers a series of self-directed online courses for veterans. She is an internationally recognized speaker and teacher in innate health. Dr. Sedgman has worked with a consulting organization in La Conner, Washington, and served on the faculty of the School of Medicine at West Virginia University. Dr. Sedgman has served as president of Manatee Tiger Bay Club and chairman of Realize Bradenton. She directed the Institute for Public Policy and Leadership at the University of South Florida and served as a consultant with the Patterson Foundation for a 3-year project at Ringling College of Art and Design. Dr. Sedgman is a graduate of Wellesley College, Trinity College, Hartford, Connecticut, and West Virginia University. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Judith Sedgman.
Okay, I'm working from a handout to limit my time. If you are at one of the tables that I didn't put them, there are some extra ones around. And so if anybody can facilitate that, if you'd like a handout and didn't get one, just please indicate that. Well, hi, I'm actually just Judy, and it's always exciting. My students call me Doc. The veterans I work with call me Dr. Judy. And I'm so glad that my name isn't Ruth. But I have been for the last 30-some years working as a psychologist in a mental health field based in resiliency, which is kind of the positive end of mental health operations. And so I work with the resiliency, the potential, the possibilities, and how people change. I got into this because I'm always very interested in why people do things and what's the basic bottom line cause. And because I think that you can't change, I look at it from what's the solution? We know that there's sexual harassment among all kinds of other human abuses of other human beings. We know that there are some people that are prone to commit that act. We know that there are some people who are prone to be vulnerable. And so we're always trying to fix it after the fact. Our whole society is geared around fixing problems after they happen because they happened and now we got to do something about them. My whole life is dedicated to prevention and preventing things from happening through education and understanding. So I've worked with many, many populations, and among the populations I've worked with are inmates who do call this inmate health. And but I've worked also with women who've been trafficked. I've worked with women who've been abused. I work with men who've been abused. I've worked with murderers, and I've worked with corporate executives all over the world. And basically, we're all just people. Now, if you've already looked at this chart, the first thing that you probably did was find yourself. But here's the deal. This chart could have had 500 gradations in it. I just limited it to 4 to give you a general idea of what the deal was. It could have had a lot of different, permutations of each level. And everybody's got to be somewhere, and we've all been everywhere at some point in our life, because state of mind is a variable. So if you looked at the chart and thought, oh great, I'm pretty much okay but stressed, and sometimes, I'm that smiley guy, but oh no, I've never been tormented. There have been moments in everybody's life when we've been everything, and to be honest, we have to admit that. Most people have a home base. So they have a psychological home base where they're comfortable. And what's true is when people live in a peaceful state of mind, when that's their home base, when they're generally quiet-minded, in touch with their own wisdom, comfortable in their own skin, at peace and at ease, it would not dawn on them to hurt another person. Because in that state of mind, people don't do that. Not even accidentally. For example, I worked for a number of years with in a consulting group that was 3 men and 3 women, and one of the guys really loved to tell jokes. And every time he went, and we were all working in this same field, and we're working together, and every time he went to tell a joke, he would say, okay, I'm going to tell a joke now. I hope I'm not going to offend you, but I want to apologize in advance if I am. And he was kind of careful what jokes he told. Now, I'm sure he had locker room jokes that he told in the locker room, but when he was with all of us together, he was self-editing because he lived in a state of mind where it mattered to him how people responded to him. It mattered to him what other people were feeling. He noticed people. Because if you've ever noticed yourself, the quieter you are, the more usually the first day after you come home from vacation, you see things you never saw before. It's like suddenly it looks like the whole world is planted flowers. because your mind is quiet and you're open to life and life is coming into you. So the thing that I believe that we as a society really, I'm a great believer in educating as many children as possible, as young as possible, into how the mind works and into where their thoughts and feelings come from within them. That we're the thinkers. We're always creating our own thoughts, and our thoughts look real to us. And when we become aware of that, we can use the feeling that we're in as a guide to the quality of the thinking we're doing. And for example, I used to live at a pretty high level of stress. Those of you who knew me years ago would remember that. And I'm hoping there are not too many of you left, but not for any bad reason, but it's just like people say, oh, I remember you were that bitchy woman. But one of the things that I learned as I got involved in this work is that I was making that up. That was not who I truly am as a human being. That was what I thought. I thought stress was the red badge of courage. I thought in the business I was in, you had to be stressed. I thought everybody was stressed. All my friends were stressed. What the heck, you know? And I really believe that. I believe that there was no real choice about it. You know, if you're going to be successful, you're probably going to be stressed and you're going to have your moments and so on. When I suddenly woke up to the fact that I'm making this whole thing up, you know, I don't have to be anything. I can be what I think I choose to be, because we're creating our own experience from the inside out, and our thoughts look real to us as soon as we think them. So if I, for example, am deeply insecure, and there are a lot of, this all starts in the teenage years, but a lot of men get very deeply insecure, and it becomes a power thing, right? A power game. If I can get a really pretty girl to like me, or if I can get, do this or do that. They don't have any consideration in that state of mind that it matters what the girl thinks. It doesn't even cross their mind. Because in an insecure state of mind, it's always, if you look at the bottom half of this chart, the difference between the people on the bottom half and the people on the top half is on the bottom half, we are in survival, and it's all about us. It's my personal thinking, my personal needs, my personal desires. I got to fix me, because people live at such stress that they are always seeking relief from their stress. At the top end of the chart, it's more and more about other people and all of us together and the connectedness of all human beings sharing life. And people become increasingly aware of the people that they're with. And if I think I do have a moment to tell you a quick story of how this really works. It's not like you have to be in my field to understand this. It's something we intuitively know, and then we talk ourselves out of it. But I worked one time with a woman this is back in her story goes back to the days when Ted Bundy, who was the famous serial rapist in Tallahassee, was not caught yet. And he had a type, the dark-haired, long dark hair, big brown eyes, pretty women. And he was ravaging women in and around the university. And my friend said she was horrified because her daughter was his type and his daughter went to that school. After he was arrested, her daughter called her and she said, "Mom, I didn't want to tell you this. I knew it would scare you, but I met him." And the mother was like, "Oh no, oh my God, what happened?" Well, she said, "My friends and I were at a bar, we were at a sports bar, and we were, just hanging out. And this guy came, he pulled in up in front in the window in a beautiful car, and he walked in, he was very well dressed, very handsome, and he walked right up to me and he starts talking, chatting me up and everything. And my friends and he's saying to me, "And I know a place where there's great music and I want you to come with me." And she said, my friends were saying to me, "Oh, look at him, he's so cute, go with him. He's so good looking, he has that nice car, he's probably rich." And she said, I just felt that he was creepy. And she said, even though my girlfriends were sitting there saying, "Oh, go ahead, we'll find our way home. Don't worry about it, just go ahead and go, have a good time. He really likes you." She said, the more he talked and the more I felt the feeling, the vibes that he was giving off, the more I thought, no, I'm out of here. So she went to the bathroom, and then she went down the back hall and asked the kitchen staff if she could leave through the back of the kitchen. And she walked out. She never came back to the table. And that night, he picked up somebody else and raped them. Now, that's what I'm talking about. In her state of mind, this works both ways, both victim and victimizer. If you're living in a clear-headed state of mind where you're really in touch with what other people are, what's going on with other people, you'll know who to trust. And you'll know to keep yourself safe. And if you're not, you don't. If you're insecure and you're thinking, yeah, he is cute, maybe I should go, if you get insecure thoughts, you're likely to do less constructive things. And that's how it works. And I teach 13-week courses in this, so there's a lot more to it, but I thought just this would give you a touch of it, that we really need to solve the problem by explaining to people to listen to their own wisdom and to avoid acting out of insecurity. So I thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Our final speaker is Lee Epting. Lee launched her tech career with Palm Computing, makers of the Palm Pilot, about 20 years ago. She delivered market-winning technology products to the U.S. and Western Europe and global markets. Nokia recruited Lee to Europe in 2003. She had profit and loss responsibility for business in Samsung, Vodafone, and Nokia. Most recently, Lee led Samsung's European Enterprise Business Team, European Product Innovation Team, and European Media Solutions Center. She resided in the UK for 7 years and in 2015 became a British citizen. Lee left Samsung in late 2015 and is currently pursuing seats at corporate boards, consulting for technology businesses, and continues to speak about technology and women in leadership. Please join me in welcoming Lee Epting.
Great. Well, good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. I'm going to read from a script because the topic that I've been asked to talk about is actually my own personal experiences as it relates to sexual harassment, and I think it's hard to do that free form because of a number of reasons. Some of them are legal, because you don't want to step out and say things just in the moment, because you're running down a story that you're recreating in your head as you're going through it. So with that, let me get started, okay? Now, I've worked in the fastest growing industry in the world for the past 30 years, and although technology may not be the sexiest industry when compared to the film industry, I suspect that the topic of sexual harassment is as prevalent in tech as it is in the film industry. The difference in terms of awareness raising on the topic of sexual harassment is that I'm not Angelina Jolie and I'm not Gwyneth Paltrow, and that's okay, because we all have different talents. But we do share one thing in common. We want to be known for our professional achievements. In the case of Angelina and Gwyneth, I suspect that it would be the Oscar that they would look back on as one of their finest professional achievements. And in the case of myself, it would be the new smartphone that puts the power of computing in the palm of your hand and changes the way that we all communicate globally. In the case of, one thing is for sure, basically, though, women do not want to be known for sexual harassment cases they've had to bring forward. It is an absolute shame that so many women have sexual harassment stories to share, myself included. And yet, I feel strongly that we have arrived at a tipping point where women's rights in the workplace need to be discussed openly with an intent to create solutions to the problems that exist today. Now, 1 in 4 women report sexual harassment in the workplace in the United States, and recent figures suggest that actually sexual harassment is on the rise, and this is per a 2015 EEOC report. Now, that same report suggests that current efforts to address the issue of sexual harassment are not sufficient because the actions of companies often are geared towards reducing the company's liability as opposed to taking proactive measures to eradicate sexual harassment. In an effort to remove the stigma around sexual harassment and a path to building a more equal workplace for women, I feel it is my duty to share my personal stories to help illustrate the fact that many companies are more concerned about their brand reputation than their employees' well-being. Probably the most offensive comment I ever received was from a work colleague who suggested that following an incident where another male colleague had harassed me, that I may not wish to raise a complaint formally because it would have a negative impact on my career growth in the company. He said it with the full intent of silencing me and threatening me. It was then, that's a Samsung ringtone, by the way, thank you. It was then that I realized that if I was going to be true to myself, then I had to not hide the shame of what had happened to me. I thought about my young son, and what type of example would I be setting if I didn't take action to protect myself? I was sick to my stomach because all of my hard work and investment in my career was at risk. All because some men felt that they could assert their power against me. Needless to say, I left that company. On another occasion, one evening, after a long day at work, I was making my way to my car, which was parked under the building which I worked, and a sales executive from my company was also on his way down to the garage. As we walked across the dimly lit garage talking, instead of him going directly to his car, he followed me to mine, and he positioned himself so that I had my back up against my car. In his slick suit and his greased back hair, he leaned in to try to kiss me. It was a very uncomfortable and frightening moment. After my awkward but firm New York type of protest, I quickly opened my driver door and jumped into my seat. Upset from the fact that I was just physically attacked and had no idea on how to manage this issue. My head was spinning. I had all kinds of thoughts. Did I do something to lead him on? More importantly, was he going to do this again to me? My stomach churned because I felt immediate loss of the feeling that I was a young, independent woman who was making a career for herself. I was on my way, and now I had hit a huge obstacle. Then he started making phone calls to my home. How he got my number, I don't know. I told him, please don't call me. I told him, you're married and you need to focus on your family. I now reflect on the irony of that advice. I felt that with each rebuff of his unwanted attention, I was going to lose some part of my professional growth. Although I didn't report directly to him, his input mattered because he was the senior sales executive and my job was to support his sales team. Now, I didn't go running to tell anyone. I didn't want to bring up such a horrible thing in my workplace, but eventually I knew that I was going to have to say something, otherwise it would never end. So I sought out a kind, wise woman in the office, and with my approval, she went to speak to the general manager of the office. And this gentleman then called me in and asked me to explain the situation in my own words. Now, that man who abused me was ultimately asked to leave the business, and I found out later that I was not his only prey. There were other women in my office who had similar experiences with him. And it made me sad that there were other women who were experiencing the same unwanted attention as me, and yet we never spoke about it. Now, the good news is the company took responsibility, and the bad news is that there was no clear path to resolve a serious matter which impacted many women over a long period of time. Now, storytelling is very important, and women are wonderful storytellers. We communicate best by word of mouth, and through the sharing of stories, we've evolved into the most powerful consumers in the world. We make and/or influence most of the purchase decisions in our home. According to one Harvard study, we control about $20 trillion of annual consumer spending, and that is bigger than the growth markets of India and China combined. Companies fear that their brand reputation is at risk with claims of sexual harassment, and thus the instinctual response is to hide the incidents, silence the individual, and hope that it basically simply goes away. But it's not going to go away. And in fact, it's going to continue to grow, and women are going to start speaking about it openly in an attempt to shift this tide. One of the most recent examples of the collective power of women is in the case of Bill O'Reilly, whose show was dropped from Fox News, in large part through a collective effort of several women's groups, including the organizers of the Women's March, who urged Fox to hashtag drop O'Reilly. I do not see the reason that why we cannot start putting in place meaningful plans to address sexual harassment in the workplace. Yes, it's uncomfortable, it's challenging, it's messy, but is there really any other option? Start with your corporate culture. The tone is set at the top of the company. Make sure that the topic of sexual harassment is not a taboo. There is a high likelihood that sexual harassment will happen in most companies, so make sure that the leaders of companies are vocal about their zero tolerance policy, and action needs to be swift. Establish a formal relationship with a third-party organization that will provide the needed support for handling complaints of sexual harassment. I personally am convinced that the internal organizations, such as Human Resources, are not the best port of call for these cases because they are inherently biased due to their reporting line. Engage experts on communication style differences between male and female employees and have continuous training. As the playwright George Bernard Shaw once said, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Women often ask me, how did you manage this issue having worked at 3 of the largest technology companies in the world? So my practical advice for women who are continuing to struggle with sexual harassment in their workplace is in what I would call the 3 Ds. Number 1, document everything. Write it as a log so as not to forget the details, and make sure that a copy of that communication is off the corporate server. Number 2, discuss the harassment. If you are not ready to do that in your workplace, then speak to your friends, your parents, your partner, your priest, whatever gives you the opportunity to say out loud the thing that is most upsetting you. There is a lot of comfort in that. And number 3, defend yourself. Find a lawyer that you trust and that understands the topic of harassment and what your options are. Even if you have not experienced sexual harassment in your workplace, a good offense is your best defense. And last, don't ever feel ashamed for the fact that some man has chosen to try to belittle you based on your gender. Stand tall, stay focused, and be the consummate professional that you are. Thank you.
Very good stuff. All right, so thank you all very much to our speakers. We're now going to open it up to questions. We have a few minutes, so what I'm going to ask is if you have a question, come on up to the microphone, introduce yourself, let us know that you're a Tiger Bay member. If you ask a question to a particular member of the panel, please let us know who. If it's to everyone, then we can address it in a particular order.
Hi, I'm Rosalie Schaefer, and I'm a member. I have a question for anyone who wants to respond, and that is, consensual sex is not considered to be harassment. However, often it's not really consensual because a supervisor can put so much pressure on an employee. This happened to my sister. She was harassed at work. She was asked for a date, and she turned it down pretty firmly, and it was an upper management person, and all of a sudden, her ratings started to go downhill. Good ratings started to go bad. Well, she dealt with it by resigning, and she went to law school, became a judge. So that's how she dealt with it. But what about the woman who has got to work because she needs that paycheck? She's a single mom. She's got kids at home. What happens is he doesn't get punished, and she turns into, in her own mind, a slut.
Please. Thank you.
We actually see those kinds of complaints. Again, and we would take that kind of complaint if there was a consensual relationship even happening through intimidation or harassment, etc. However, although we take the complaint, we have to prove it, and therein lies the difficulty. So being able to support her allegations would become an issue. Being able to show that there was some differentiation between when this consensual relationship started versus why now she's complaining. There was some nexus there, something happened. So we would have to probe and find out exactly what occurred, and if in fact there was a violation. I'm not saying that we couldn't do that, but those types of cases, they're very, very difficult to actually prove. We take the complaint, but in terms of proving it is another thing. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. Part of that, could you also address, as many people know, I don't hide, I used to do criminal defense, and a lot of times you'll hear us saying from lawyers that, it's not the crime, it's the cover-up. So there's also retaliation.
Sure.
So even if that can't be proved, if there's some sort of retaliation.
Well, absolutely. Certainly if there's some tangible action, some harm that's occurred, maybe she's been demoted or she's been disciplined, something has occurred. A lot of these charges, we do marry sexual harassment and retaliation. You see that arm in arm, hand in hand. Retaliation is a violation too, as long as it's against one of the protected bases under federal law. So if we could show, and actually that may be even a little easier to prove, that there was some line, some delineation where she was started to be treated differently, retaliation may in fact be easier to prove than the actual underlying sexual harassment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right.
I'm Mike Barber. I'm a member of Tiger Bay, and I'm just following up because she just brought something up, and I appreciate everything that y'all said. And I know this is sort of an outlying thing, the aspect of it being consensual and being sexual harassment, but it made me think, and I'd be interested to hear from each one of you if y'all think the case with Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, was that sexual harassment? So.
All right, who wants to jump up for that one?
Well, actually, I actually know Bill Clinton. I used to live down the road from him, and I wasn't a supporter of his, but got to know him somewhat. I would answer that question. My own personal view is yes, that was harassment. And the reason for that is because he used his position of power to influence a decision of a girl that was working in a position much lower than his own. And as was being said earlier from, I believe, Anne, when you have a senior position in a company or a business or the government or whatever it happens to be, you have a certain level of responsibility that you're held. You have fiduciary responsibility to protect the company you work for. So you need to be very careful about what you do and you say. And I have found that over the course of my career, as I continued to elevate myself up into the top echelons of the 3 biggest in the world, that I had to change my behavior. I couldn't go out with the group. I couldn't go out drinking and partying and doing like I did when I was in my younger years. I had to step back because I had a responsibility, and I knew that there was more opportunity for wrongdoing the more powerful I became in my role and the more that could be misconstrued. So if I look at him in his position as, the leader of the free world, I would say that, doing what he did in the Oval Office was an absolute abuse of power. That's my own perspective.
I agree with Lee, but I wanted to point something out to that, the psychological element of it, which is men in power have a real opportunity to mentor young women. And when somebody signs on to be a Senate page or a White House intern or a young woman who's ambitious and smart, and you don't get those jobs, I mean, some of them are patronage, but you still have to pull your own weight. And so to me, anytime a man abuses the opportunity to be a mentor, a teacher, a person who elevates that person's understanding of whatever they're doing, that's abuse. It's abuse of their power, and it's abuse of that person's professional dedication to doing what she did. And the saddest thing that I remember ever hearing is when she testified before the Senate and said, "But I thought he loved me." So she got that, she made that up in a sense, but he perpetuated it. And I, as a person who's been very grateful throughout my life to have many wonderful men that mentored me in my professional life and really helped me to advance, I have to say there's a huge difference, and you can feel it right away when you're in that person's presence.
Misty is going to have a question, but if I could just real quick, because I know some people are probably going to have to leave and head back to work, but we're going to stay and answer questions. Remember, today is our last meeting. There is no meeting in December. We'll be back on January 18th. You all are going to get, all members are going to get a survey in your email, so please check your emails. It's asking about all kinds of things about the club, trying to get your feedback. Attendance is great, but we really want to hear from you all, so please take the time to do that. It's going to come from us. It's from Survey Monkeys, so that is legit. It's really from us. Membership, we're all set. Oh, Constant Contact. It was created by... I'm sorry, I don't know. So if you get a survey from the Tiger Bay Club, it's legit. Please answer those questions and give us your honest feedback, please. Membership, of course, 2018 is about to kick off, so please join us. If you know any younger folks, millennials, that are interested in topics that we cover, want to get more involved, please tell them about us. We'd like to have some younger members. Thank you, as always, to METV. You guys are always great, showing up, making us look good. And again, we're going to keep answering questions, but if I don't get a chance to say it again, have a wonderful and safe holiday, and we will look forward to seeing everyone and your friends next year at Tiger Bay. All right, thank you. So, Misty?
So I recently listened to a defense attorney for Roy Moore, who's running for Senate in the state of Alabama, try to defend his client and say, you know, these allegations are more than 30 years old, so it's really just a political ploy. But there have been so darn many of them. So I just wonder if anyone can respond to that time frame. How important is it? And where there's smoke, there's fire, maybe?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, yeah. Now, in terms of any criminal activity, you'd have to, I guess, would address that. But in terms of the commission, the EOC, there's a 300-day statute of limitation. So at the date in which the last harm occurred, or if it's ongoing, we would calculate from that last date on up to 300 days, and then you would be able to come in and file with us. Now, if it's an ongoing complaint, certainly that the clock is still running. But if you're discharged or your employment has somehow been terminated there, or even if you've been suspended, if there's been a suspension or a promotion, there's a date that has to be a fixed date that we can utilize to calculate the 300th day. Okay.
Yes, please.
One of the reasons, I think Lee did a beautiful job of explaining why women keep silent for a long time. And men too. I mean, I've worked with men that have been abused by superiors and by women. So the topic is the Me Too topic, but I can tell you that it's not gender specific in the real world. But I think the reason is because of fear and fear of retaliation and fear of not being believed. And every time this comes up, you see it play out. They're lying, don't believe them, they're gold diggers, they're trying to get something from me. She wasn't that good at her job anyway, and the worst one, not to be political, but the worst one I heard is when Donald Trump said, well, you look at her, why would I mess around with somebody that looked like that? And, these are ways in which we get conditioned to keep our mouths shut. And then as society changes, and I think the reason it's not like we've had a sudden surge of sexual harassment, we've had a sudden surge of people listening to women who have something to say now, and women are finding their voice.
I just wanted to echo her last point about the changes in society. I can just say I'm not a millennial, but I'm not a baby boomer in between. And, one of the things I noticed starting out is and I mentioned this to Ms. Hawthorne, there was a case at a firm I worked for in Miami that a woman was bringing sexual harassment. And my boss, who had been an attorney for 25 years, she was a female attorney, she actually worked for an admiralty law firm in Miami, so very male-dominated profession. She said, that's not sexual harassment. I will tell you what sexual harassment is. So I think, one of the things that people have difficulty with is things that might have been not ever acceptable, but accepted at the time, are not acceptable, and as we get more vocal. So, kind of also being open-minded as, the workforce gets, changes, that, we need to look to what people's experiences and not discount them just because perhaps we put up with things or other people put up with things that were much worse.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Ms. Hawthorne, Ms. Chapman, Dr. Sedgman, Ms. Epting, thank you all very much for taking your time to come and share your knowledge and your experiences with the group. Thank you to our members for coming out. We'll look forward to seeing you in 2018. As I've said repeatedly, no one, and as I said at the beginning, no one deserves to be harassed, belittled, coerced for any reason based on who they are. So it's good that the curtain is being pulled back. People are having the courage to come forward and talk about what's happened to them, what's going on, and we can address this problem by speaking about it and coming up with solutions that will hopefully work. So thank you all very much. Have a safe holiday, and we'll see you in 2018.
you.